you for joining us at the third annual Coalesce. My name is Amada Echeverria, and I'm on the community team at DBT Labs. So I'm thrilled to be hosting today's session, Deliver Fresh Data with DBT and Striim. We'll be joined by our speaker, John Coute, who is Striim's Director of Product. John has worked in data for 10 years with a background in computer science, distributed systems, and data visualization. In his spare time, John hosts data practitioners on his podcast, What's New in Data? And our chat champ, Carolyn, an analytics engineering manager at DBT Labs, will be sharing the podcast link in Slack right now, so check it out. Before we jump into things, some recommendations for making the best out of this session. All chat conversation is taking place in Coalesce Deliver Fresh Data channel of DBT Slack. So if you're not part of the chat, you have time to join right now. Visit getdbt.com/community, join Slack, and search for Coalesce Deliver Fresh Data when you enter the space. We encourage you to set up Slack and your browser side by side and ask other attendees questions, make comments, or react at any point in the channel. After the session, John will be available in the Slack channel to answer your questions, which is awesome. So we encourage you to ask questions at any point during the session, though. You don't have to wait till the end. So let's get started. Over to you, John.
Thank you so much, Amada. Good morning to everyone who's tuning in here in New Orleans at DBT Coalesce. Thank you to DBT for organizing such a great event. Everything's been very smooth so far. And thank you to all those who are tuning in across the world. Good evening if you're in the India time zone. Good afternoon if you're over in the UK. So very excited for this very online distributed format. My talk today, Deliver Fresh Data with DBT and data streaming. So we're going to get into what it really means to deliver fresh data. As Amada mentioned, I have worked in data for the last 10 years with a focus on distributed systems and data streaming, data visualization. But in today's talk, we'll really drill into data freshness, what it is and why it actually matters. What does it actually mean if you tell your business users that you have a data freshness SLA, and how you can keep up with those commitments in terms of capturing and delivering fresh data to all your business consumers in the format they need it. One of the ways of capturing fresh data is using change data capture and streams. So we'll get into that a bit and how it ties back into your analytics infrastructure. And then how do you actually make sure data is fresh? Right? If you're telling your business stakeholders or analytics users that, hey, our data is always going to be within 15 and 30 minutes of freshness, how do you actually guarantee that? And then we can also talk about, some of the discourse around data contracts, because you can supplement your data freshness SLAs with data contracts and making sure that your schemas are all in sync. So we'll start with data freshness, just a simple definition. It's a very colloquial way of describing, time since your data was last updated. If you use Tableau or any BI tools, you will see that, there's a way to set data freshness toggles where you can set the last time your report refreshes, and basically assuming that your underlying tables and models are also fresh at the same time, which may not be a given, and I'll get into that during our talk. So, what does freshness really mean in an analytics engineering context? Is it the time of my last DBT model run of the current, reports that are using it? Is it the time of the last ETL sync to the staging raw tables? Is it the timestamp of the latest record in your last data set, right? Because you can have a model run with data that might not be the most the freshest data from your upstream sources, because let's say you're doing ETL from a database or doing ELT from some sort of application. You might have records missing from the last sync. You might have some dead letter queues because the ETL sync failed. You might have long-running transactions in your upstream database. So this is a bit of a meta discussion, but what is data freshness really mean when you tell your stakeholders that, yeah, my data is within the last 30 minutes of freshness? And there's a lot of great testing infrastructure in DBT to monitor data freshness from the source freshness and recency macros where you can actually infer data freshness from the data itself or the time of the last model run. So one of the nice out-of-the-box features in DBT Cloud to help with this is data source freshness, which will allow you to alert and view very simply, hey, is this going to be captured within the time SLA that you've told your business users that, hey, okay, so if you're running reports, all your data sets will be within 1 hour or 30 minutes or 15 minutes. And one of the nice features in DBT Cloud is for those models, it'll show you essentially when that last run happened, and you can build alerts off of it if you're not meeting the freshness SLA. But then there's still challenges that are upstream to DBT that you have to account for. I pulled a thread from Joel Labes where he ran into an issue where he was generating a model with 50 source tables, and it turned out that one of the upstream ETL, ELT applications, in this case it was Fivetran, hadn't been syncing for that time range. So it didn't surface as a freshness issue. He had some other model building logic in between. But these are the real world challenges that you hit, because it's not going to be as simple as, hey, data freshness is the time my last model run, assume all the data is there, everything's going to be clean and pristine. So what if the source is fresh but the downstream model runs are delayed? How do we catch this before business users do? Because I've been in many escalations where analytics teams are under the gun because there is some mandate at a business level that, hey, this data is going to be within 30 minutes of freshness. So the business teams will say, okay, assuming that all our data is within 30 minutes of freshness, we're going to build these workflows, and now that data is missing, right? We expected this data to be within 15 to 30 minutes of freshness, and we can't do our Salesforce workflows or our email workflows, whatever it is, right? And that's when analytics teams are under the gun and have to start debugging data freshness. But I wanted to first jump into some real world use cases for data freshness before we do too much technical. Some of the ones that I've seen, such as near real-time inventory, where you might have some workflows that will tell the user essentially, hey, this is our inventory as of the latest snapshot. So a user might try to buy it, but then after they do, they figure out that, oh, I thought it was in stock, but it turned out to be out of stock. So that is one case where you actually need fresh inventory data so that your end users are able to see an accurate reflection of what's actually available to them. Alerts for unusual activity. If you have some type of use case where you have some sort of fraud going on, fraud is one of those cases where you definitely want to be able to interact with the data sooner rather than later, and be able to orchestrate any workflows to to resolve any fraud alerts. And also, we're seeing more use cases for personalized in-experience offers, where you're in the app, you have some VIP customer models running in your warehouse. You may be building those with DBT to basically build a single source of truth of your customer across their orders, their browsing history, and based on that, when next time they're actually in your app or in your product, you're able to serve them with a personalized and experience offer. And that's another case where fresh data is required, because you want to be able to catch them in the moment, in context with what they're doing in your app. So now I'll get into sourcing fresh data. So there's a few ways to source fresh data from doing application ELT from your Salesforce or your HubSpot or Marketo. In a lot of cases, that'll work pretty well with your pretty common set of ELT tools. But here I'll get into one of the more challenging areas of data freshness, which is sourcing fresh data with change data capture. So change data capture is essentially taking data from your operational databases, whether it's Postgres, MySQL, MongoDB, being able to mine the transaction logs to pull all the inserts, updates, deletes, the DMLs into your data warehouse so that you can start building models in DBT using it. So essentially there's a few ways you can do it. One is being able to just replicate the DMLs, your inserts, updates, deletes, to a staging table in that exact format. So if there's an insert, you're going to apply that as an insert in staging. Or if there's an update, you're literally going to apply the merge as an update on that record as some sort of upsert, or you're going to do a hard delete if a delete comes through. The second one, method for change data capture, which I see being more common in the analytics world, is having more of an audit log, where I will take basically the DML and have apply it as more of an audit record, where I have all the transaction data, but I'll supplement it with the operation type, whether it was an insert, update, delete, track it as a soft delete, so you're not actually deleting records from your warehouse, and then the timestamp of that specific transaction. A more expanded view of change data capture, and I always like running teams through this because it gives you an idea of the actual investment you need to make from an infrastructure standpoint, to be able to buffer transactions. Because really with change data capture, we're doing bookkeeping on transactions, because transactions with databases don't all happen sequentially, right? You might start transaction one, and then before that transaction commits, you can begin a second transaction. You may have long-running transactions that you have to buffer. The transaction could be buffered in memory or spill to disk if it's really long-running, and it would overflow. So having that large transaction cache then flush out to the target system. This is getting a little bit into very, very technical details, but just to give an idea of like some of the upstream complexity that can exist with capturing fresh data. There's a few ways to serve fresh data. The one that is most common is really just near real-time analytics on fresh data, where hey, we're syncing data to staging, and on some interval it could be as low as 1 minute, which would be really fast, but it could also be on a more relaxed interval, such as 15-30 minutes, which I see more common, running those models again. And then there's some work that has to happen. Most of the in the data warehousing and BI world, things are done on time-based intervals, and really just shrinking that down from 1 hour to 30 minutes to 15 minutes to 10 minutes is the journey that I've seen with most customers. The second one is streaming analytics, where you're doing SQL-based streaming in flight, maintaining materializations. You'll see other warehouses coming into play, like new ones where you see for instance, Materialize is coming in and doing their version of incremental view management, which is very interesting. So these are a couple ways to serve fresh data to the business. The first one is the more common one. The second one is a kind of a growing area at this time, which I think is going to be interesting to watch. And there's a couple ways to deal with fresh data. Like, I would say the easy mode is you use a CDC or an ELT tool, sync it to your warehouse. The capture may happen in real time. The sync may be closer to near real time. And then you run your downstream models in DBT as data goes into staging, and you transform that from staging to prod tables. And then from there, what you're going to do is you're going to monitor your freshness SLAs using something like DBT cloud source freshness, depending on how you've sequenced and how you've chained your models. This will mostly work, but if you have models that are stale due to some upstream issue, such as in the ELT or the CDC sync, you'll need some outside monitoring to supplement that, to really make sure that, hey, yeah, even though the model ran like in the last 15 minutes, there's actually some long-running transactions on this critical table that haven't synced to my warehouse yet. And in that case, you do need to notify your business users that, hey, we're going to be a little bit behind. I would say the expert mode, where most companies are starting to move towards, now that they understand the complexity and being able to adhere to the business use cases, is using CDC and data streaming, building some of the facts and dimensions in Striim, writing it to a warehouse with more of the deterministic ingest transformations done in Striim. Then you can run your downstream models in DBT to build on that initial model data. And then you can go ahead and use the great tooling in DBT Cloud to monitor freshness SLAs on that data with more of a safeguard around any upstream CDC issues. I cover that in depth in a tutorial here. I'll follow it up offline, but it does have more of the talk more about the sequences of going from CDC, ELT to loading to staging to monitoring source freshness in DBT. So it's a little more comprehensive in terms of delivering fresh data to all your business users and being able to actually confidently say, hey, I'm meeting this SLA. Within Striim itself, so Striim is a CDC streaming product. What we do is we do have metadata on the source capture at a very granular transaction level in the CDC write-ahead logs. We're able to mine this at the table level, and then we can track it all the way to the target ACK in the warehouse. So there we actually do compute lag on an interval which is closer to seconds. So you can actually fire off alerts if, hey, if my source database is trailing my target staging table by, let's say, more than a minute, I can fire an alert. And that's where you're going to be able to catch issues with long-running transactions. So this is a good way to supplement any data freshness workflows you have in DBT. So you have more of a comprehensive way of saying, okay, my transactional data is definitely fresh as well. So there's been a lot of discussion on data contracts, jumping from data freshness to data contracts. And in a way, if you have data freshness SLAs, then data contracts are sort of an implied SLA as well, because if you have schemas changing under you that are going to break some prod workloads, you'll again need to notify your business users that, hey, data is not going to sync properly, and we won't be meeting our data freshness SLAs. And essentially, Ben Stansel, he has a lot of great material on data in general, but I like this diagram he came up with as a way of running tests in the DBT layer on the warehouse. And this is a good method that people should look at. I can share a link to the blog post in the Slack as soon as I'm done here. Essentially what he's doing is he's tracking data as it's written to the raw staging tables, doing some unit tests in the DBT layer to see that all the data contracts, all the schemas are expected and syncing to prod and creating your prod models correctly. Now, Ben, even, he's a very smart guy. He pointed out that this isn't perfect. What he really means is it's not totally comprehensive because, you're going to want to run tests in the warehouse regardless. But, as he mentioned, it might introduce latency. It's going to create all sorts of problems for tables that are loading incrementally. He's sort of elaborating on the issue that I'm bringing up, which is that, you're going to want to supplement your testing on DBT, right, with some of the upstream concerns that you might have. So one of the ways that we address this with our users at Striim is in the actual CDC layer, we can capture in real time that that's something that has broken the contract. So you can halt the pipeline and alert your end users, or what you can do is automatically propagate the schema changes to your warehouse based on rules around certain schema changes. So I can say, hey, for create table or add column, let's propagate that. That's no problem. Just automatically update that in my stage or my warehouse prod tables. But if I have some sort of schema change that's definitely going to break some underlying analytics workflows, then I should send an alert in real time, because you don't want a DDL that you can't handle followed by a large volume of DMLs, because then you're going to have a much tougher resync scenario. So in that situation, time is literally money there, because you're going to have a larger and more expensive, more time-consuming resync process as more DMLs build up. So kind of the way I look at supplementing what Ben suggested there, build your models and monitor your model freshness in DBT, run all those tests there. Anything where latency is a concern, especially with database CDC where transactions can come so fast, you're going to want to catch those schema changes as fast as possible. And again, we have API-based coordination with the DBT layer that I shared in that blog post as well in the chat. So this is where we see a very comprehensive way of essentially adhering to data freshness SLAs. So this is where you can actually have confidence telling your business users, yes, we can hit that 15-minute, we can hit that 10-minute. And then maybe over time, if this is working well, you can really crank up the knobs, increase your sync frequencies from the streaming layer down to 5 minutes or 3 minutes. Start looking into some of those materialization features coming out in Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, their streaming APIs. It's going to be some fun stuff happening there. So you're really going to want to stay on top of a lot of the innovation going around data freshness in the business intelligence and data warehousing world that's coming up now. So in summary, fresh data builds trust. You should, as an analytics engineer, know your freshness SLAs, be able to confidently stick to it for your business users. You can use CDC and streaming to deliver on some of your freshness SLAs. CDC will still keep load on the source database to a minimum, even if your freshness SLAs are looser, like 30 minutes to 1 hour. You'll still want change data capture in that scenario so that you're not doing polling, query-based change tracking on the database. Fresh data does not necessarily equal streaming data, but sometimes there's overlap because you might still be doing things in micro batches where everything's based on faster sync frequencies to deliver fresh data versus the streaming world, which is purely continuous query processing. Lots of great tools out there to monitor freshness SLAs, especially DBT. I've seen a lot of customers successfully use the source freshness features. I always just come in with the caveat that you're going to want to supplement this with the upstream ELT monitoring as well, so you catch any of those issues as soon as possible. So I'm going to open it up to Q&A now. Just going to mention one more time about What's New in Data podcast. We had some great guests for season 2, such as Sarah Krasnick, Ben Rogojan, Joe Rice, Julie Bainin from Clearbit, Shinji Kim, and some other great ones as well. And if you are an analytics engineer and you want to talk about some of the real world experiences that you've seen, I'm happy to host you as well. So thank you to everyone who attended. I'm going to go through a question and answer now. There's a lot of stuff going on in Slack. I'm going to go through a couple of them. So the first one that came in, there was a really good comment from Leo Folsom from Datafold. Which was more of a comment around the lines of, it's easy to think of examples in any industry, in healthcare, clinical decision making, et cetera, which is true. That I see it as well. I see data freshness as being a very horizontal problem. I came up with some use cases just based on what I've seen, but every industry, every company probably has their own flavor of data freshness problems. So Stephen Dury from DBT Labs has a question that states, do you think that we will end up in a world across the next 3 years where streaming data is being stored alongside our batch data in a data warehouse, a la Snowflake, BigQuery, Databricks? Or will data teams have to support separate storage products such as Elastic Materialize, ClickHouse? When I was studying distributed systems, I always go back to Michael Stonebreaker's comment that no one size fits all. I think that we are seeing Snowflake, BigQuery, more so Databricks natively support streaming as an ingest concept. For some teams that might work, using like Snowflake's streaming Snowpipe APIs. For BigQuery, they have streaming ingest as well. Databricks obviously has Spark streaming natively built into it. And for some teams that might work to meet your data freshness SLAs. A lot of innovation happening with companies like Materialize that are really built ground up for the streaming incremental world. Striim itself has a continuous query processing engine that's more meant for the ingest layer. So I think that teams will have to say, okay, what is our Hi, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I think I'm back. Thanks. Okay, so hopefully you all got my last question. Ultimately, I say, no one size fits all. Evaluate the streaming capabilities that are coming out in Snowflake BigQuery, or see if something built ground up for streaming like Materialize meets your needs. The next question is Striim able to support CDC on sources that do not have CDC capabilities? So Striim itself does change data capture from databases, even if they don't natively support change streams. We're reminding the write-ahead logs. When it comes to application sources, like Salesforce, we can use their we do have connections to Salesforce's CDC API as well, along as doing micro batch lookups that do more delta on the timestamps. So you can look at what we do in our documentation in our blog, but generally we support change data capture from databases, and then change data capture like ELT from or capture from SAS connectors using more timestamp deltas. Next question is given that from Martin, and Martin is from it's Martin Holika. Given that the reason for Freshness is to provide the most up-to-date analytics, whenever there is a DML example, an added column, so like a DDL on an extremely large DAG, is there a good way to balance the want to incorporate that CDC swiftly in prod versus ensuring all the testing is done? Is this an example of having to collaborate on the true understanding of an SLA? That is such a good question, Martin. I think this is where teams fall into traps where they might agree to an SLA without understanding the underlying complexity and investment required in terms of actually meeting that SLA. There are ways you can automate most of the cases. So like in Striim, we call it common DDL. So like there's a set of DDLs that we expect can happen. So just adding a column, creating a table. We're gonna just try to adhere to those common DDLs, assuming that's 90% of what's gonna happen, right? And in those cases, we can have completely automated response, propagation, make sure that that's handled in downstream systems as well. But then you're always gonna have the unexpected DDL. That's where ensuring all the testing is done. You're going to need teams to have some sort of manual intervention, right? Because you're going to need to essentially run your tests again. You had some unexpected DDL that you don't account for out of the box because downstream systems may not be able to handle them out of the box, right? Because yeah, I might have added a column, and sure, I updated my stage and I updated some of my prod tables, but what is my report going to do with that extra column? I don't know. It's not going to automatically render it in a chart, right? Unless I have some sort of just really simple table visualization that's wired to do that, which isn't always the case. So I think that ultimately teams will have to go through an extra cycle of dev tests to understand what it takes to deliver on their data freshness SLA. A great question, Martin. Tyler Hillary has a good question. As someone who's only dealt with typical batch analytics workflow, what's the easiest way to dip my toes into the streaming world? Seems like the technology is so different. And Tyler, that's a great question. I think that every company that's doing CDC really should, off of a database, should start streaming that data into the warehouse. And I think, tools like Striim will do that out of the box. It feels like an ELT product, but underlying mechanism is actually doing data streaming, and that's how we're able to capture things like schema evolution in real time. There is like an analytical layer because the traditional batch style CDC products will actually do all disk-based processing and just essentially copying files from one place to another, which is pretty brittle. So I think the easiest, dip your toe way is really to do streaming CDC from your database to your warehouse, because to you it'll feel like just another ETL ELT sync as an end user, and then from there you can look at doing more streaming incremental model building, things along those lines. But I think that's more advanced and it's going to require a little more investment. So thanks for the question, Tyler. Next one from Junia. Please provide us a practical example of a CDC contract between operational data provider and consumer. Really practical one in terms of a CDC contract. I assume this is a data contract, maybe a schema contract. So there could be a couple actually, based on the question, but basically what I'll infer from this, there could be two types of CDC contracts. There could be a data freshness contract, and there could also be a schema level contract. So if it's a data freshness contract, I work with customers that do this all the time. So essentially, they're building. I'll take the inventory example again. So they might have some operational database that's tracking inventory for their retail systems. And then from their warehouse, they're building some smart workflows, analytics-driven workflows that are using that inventory and serving it to customers in some fashion. So in that case, if I'm building applications and workflows that are serving the customer, that will usually have some sort of freshness SLA, because I can say as a business user that this data in the warehouse is within 5 minutes of recency for my inventory data. Now, if I violate that contract and we're lagging just for hours, now you're gonna have more end users seeing data that's way out of accuracy from their real-time inventory data. And essentially you're going to start impacting business processes, such as, like, let's say some sort of some email workflow offers something to a customer is actually sending them an item that's out of stock and won't ship for 8 weeks. That's not a good customer experience, right? And this could be applied to many industries, such as healthcare. If you're running online events and you're doing some sort of login workflows based on what's going on from the operational database to the warehouse. The next one would be the data contracts in terms of the schemas. So there I would say that, hey, my reports all depend on some underlying schema in the database. There we expect the data to be in this format, these exact columns, these exact types. I might have a schema change in the underlying database, which will maybe drop the column, add another column, change the column type. That will break some of my analytics workflows and data visualization and reporting. So we have to find a way to actually handle that schema change manually. That's a way of breaking a data contract. Anytime it requires manual intervention to not only fix the underlying models, but also fix the reports that rely on those specific schemas. So thank you, Junya, for that question. Next question is from Leo Folsom from Datafold. Follow on to Tyler's question, how do you suggest getting started using streaming CDC if you've only ever done the traditional brittle batch? So there's a couple ways to do it. Essentially look at products that natively do streaming CDC. In Striim's case, it will feel like just doing traditional ELT, all the complexities abstracted away from you. If you want to do it more from a developer standpoint, you can play with things like Debezium and Kafka and trying to go from like a CDC streaming Kafka to a table in Snowflake. That could be like a fun little adventure in terms of going from a batch style ELT to streaming CDC. In Striim, we just have an ELT like experience. It's just using streaming under the covers. So a couple ways, a lot of options out there, and a lot of innovation happening in the field that's making it easier for customers and making it feel like a true, just ELT batch, micro batch sync. So I don't see any more questions. I'm also going to reply to all the questions over Slack. Thank you to everyone who joined the talk today on delivering fresh data with DBT and data streaming. I hope it was great for everyone who joined and you were able to learn a lot. Thank you so much to DBT for organizing this great event. Thank you, Amada, for helping with this specific talk, and hope everyone has a great rest of their event.
Awesome. Thank you, John. That was awesome. We haven't gotten the chance to do live Q&A with all the speakers, so that was amazing. So thanks for your time. And so, folks, as you know, you don't have to fight your way through the crowd to meet the speaker. Instead, you can just speak with John directly on Slack, as you've been doing. So for those of you joining live, stay in the Coalesce Deliver Fresh Data channel on DBT Community Slack if you'd like to continue the Q&A with John. And the next session, titled How Cisco Powers Its Modern ELT Approach with Fivetran and DBT Labs, is in 15 minutes, as well as how to leverage the DBT community as the first and only data hire to survive. That one's also starting in 15 minutes at 10:30 a.m. CDT. So we hope to see you at either of those. And John, thank you again for your time. This has been delightful.